In the early 1900s, many football players died or were seriously injured. America was conflicted and wanted to abolish football. However, President Theodore Roosevelt saved football by creating new rules and reforms of college coaches. Theodore Roosevelt was born on October 27, 1858, and grew up in New York City, the second of 4 children. As a child, Teddy was often ill. As a teenager, he willed himself to become strong. He joined a gymnastics team, and he enjoyed weightlifting. This helped Roosevelt to become a lifelong advocate of exercise, sports, and the strenuous life. After graduating from Harvard, Roosevelt married Edith Carroll and raised 6 children. In the early 1900s, in 1900, Theodore Roosevelt became vice president under President McKinley. Unfortunately, in September 1901, President McKinley was assassinated. This tragedy put Theodore Roosevelt in the White House as the nation's 26th president. At the age of 42, he was the youngest person ever to serve as president. In the early 1900s, sports in America remained very popular. College football had tens of thousands of spectators. However, football was brutal as players locked arms in a huddle and used their helmetless heads like battering rams to slowly move the ball forward. These dog piles often left the ball carrier at the bottom of the pile with a severe injury to a spinal cord, brain injury, broken ribs, or death. With very low protective gear and growing popularity, there was an increase in the football deaths and injuries. In 1904, the College Tribune reported 18 football deaths and 159 serious injuries, mostly among college players. The football deaths and injuries shocked America. Many began to call for the banishment of football. Football came to be viewed as evil and a menace. Shaler Matthews, the dean of the University of Chicago, said, "Football today is a social obsession, a boy-killing, education, prostituting, gladiatorial sport." He compared the football fans with the ancient Roman spectators enjoying the gory deaths of the gladiators. Charles Eliot, the president of Harvard University, saw his opportunity to go after football. He wrote the report called The Evil of Football and stated his dislike for the game. He wrote the games very often resulted in players suffering injuries that led to permanent weaknesses. Harvard's president, Eliot, believed that the game resembled war. In one of his reports, he said, "Hateful conditions is that football is a fight and resembles war." Many football students saw many of their fellow teammates got hurt from tackling during the game. There was an immense public pressure to ban the sport because of its violence. The sport of football was in peril. Theodore Roosevelt was President of the United States from 1901 to 1909. During this time, he had many serious global and state affairs. Yet he found time to work on the football regulations. Theodore Roosevelt was a man who understood power, and he used this power to influence change. Teddy Roosevelt loved football and believed that football was a good training for the battlefield and prepared young men for manhood. Yet during his presidency, the American public believed that football should be banned. President Roosevelt also saw the dangers in the game and wanted to protect the football players. The St. John's Athletic Association said to President Roosevelt that, "Will you not advocate for such a revolutionary movement in all schools in the field of your influence?" Many schools demanded from President Roosevelt he needed to do something in his power to save football. He had a personal and public interest in football. As a father, he watched his son escorted off the field after being injured in many games. He also saw the need to clean up the game of football so the American public could enjoy the sport as safe, morally ethical, and honest. Roosevelt received a letter from his old friend, Etiquette Peabody. Both men loved football. Peabody expressed great concern to his old friend about the dishonesty and violence in college football. He stated in his note to the president, "You and I believe in the game and its beneficial effects upon boys and young men when it's carried out unfairly." He asked the president to begin a complete revolution by bringing together all the coaches from the major universities. He believed Roosevelt was the only man who could accomplish this, and the president responded in agreement. It was clear to President Roosevelt he had to get involved in the football debate. In a letter, the president spoke of the hope for the football summit. "I want to take up this football situation and try to get the game played on a thoroughly clean basis.
President Roosevelt called the football summit on October 9th, 1905, at the White House with the head coaches and representatives of college football power schools, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, to improve the rules of the game. They discussed first downs, blitzes, and how to prevent dog piles. President Roosevelt urged the rules to reduce violence and to set a better example for fair play. Unfortunately, the rules were not routinely enforced. There was little change in the game. The 1905 football season was again brutal. 19 player fatalities and 137 serious injuries. Following another deadly season, Stanford and California switched to rugby. Columbia, Northwestern, and Duke dropped football entirely. Harvard President Charles Eliot warned that Harvard could be next. President Roosevelt did not want Eliot to pull Harvard out of football. President Roosevelt wrote in a letter, "I think Harvard will be doing a baby act if she takes any such foolish course as President Eliot advises." President Roosevelt held a second White House summit with the hopes of positively influencing the 1906 football season. The president urged the college coaches and football authorities to make radical rule changes. The Intercollegiate Conference approved rule changes for the 1905 season. The reforms included 1. A forward pass, 2. Abolishing dog piles, 3. Creating a neutral zone between offense and defense, and 4. Extended the first down distance to 10 yards to be gained in 3 downs. These reforms stretched the players across the field. Fatalities declined dramatically in 1906. With 11 fatalities in 1906, injuries were also reduced. Americans came back around to enjoying football again. Many of these reforms, initiated by President Roosevelt and the college coaches in 1906, are still enjoyed by American football fans today. He was aware that he needed to get involved, as the American public was not willing to accept the game's casualty rate. The influence and power that Teddy Roosevelt demonstrated in reforming football can still be seen in football games we enjoy today. Football is still one of America's favorite pastimes, with the National Football League as a $9 billion industry. However, football's future is in danger of being abolished once again. The recent findings and research on chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, a progressive degenerative disease of the brain found in people with a history of repetitive trauma, and changing football's future. Although we have more technology and protective gear, football's future is still in danger.